Antonio José de Sucre y Alcalá, known as the Gran Mariscal de Ayacucho, was a Venezuelan independence leader and the second president of Bolivia. Sucre was one of Simón Bolívar's closest friends, generals and statesmen. The city of Sucre, Bolivia's capital, is named for him, as is a state of Venezuela and a department of Colombia. Biography. Family. The aristocratic Sucre family traces its roots back to origins in Flanders. It arrived in Venezuela through Charles de Sucre y Pardo, a Flemish nobleman, son of Charles Adrian de Sucre, Marquis of Peru, and Buenaventura Carolina Isabel Garrido y Pardo, of Spanish noblewomen. Charles de Sucre y Pardo served as a soldier in Catalonia in 1698 and was later named governor of Cartagena de Indias and captain general of Cuba. On December 22, 1779, Charles de Sucre y Pardo arrived in Cumaná, Venezuela, having been named governor of New Andalusia, which includes present-day Sucre state. Military career. In 1814, Antonio José de Sucre joined the fight for South American independence from Spain. The Battle of Pichincha took place on May 24, 1822, on the slopes of the Pichincha volcano, near Quito in what is now Ecuador. The encounter, fought in the context of the Spanish-American Wars of Independence, pitted a patriot army under Sucre against a royalist army commanded by Field Marshal Melchor I. Merrick. The defeat of the royalist forces brought about the liberation of Quito and secured the independence of the provinces belonging to the Real Audiencia de Quito, or Presidencia de Quito, the Spanish colonial administrative jurisdiction from which the Republic of Ecuador would eventually emerge. As of late 1824, royalists still had control of most of southern Peru as well as Real Felipe fought in the port of Callao. On December 9, 1824, the Battle of Ayacucho took place at Pampa de la Quinuit near the town of Quinuit between royalist and patriot forces. Sucre, as Simón Bolívar's lieutenant, led the patriot forces to victory over the viceroy José de Sucre, who was wounded. After the battle, Second Commander-in-Chief José de Canturac signed the final capitulation of the royalist army on his behalf. As a result, he was promoted, at the request of the Peruvian Congress, to Marshal and as General-in-Chief by the Colombian legislature. After the victory at Ayacucho, following precise orders from Bolívar, Sucre, nominated as Ayacucho's Grand Marshal, entered Upper Peru territory on February 25, 1825. Besides having orders of installing an immediately independent administration, his role was limited to giving an appearance of legality to the process that Upper Peruvians themselves had begun already. Royalist General Pedro Antonio Olañeta stayed in Potosi, where he received by January the Union Infantry Battalion coming from Puno under the command of Colonel José María Valdés. Olañeta then summoned a war council, which agreed to continue the resistance in the name of Ferdinand VII. Next, Olañeta distributed his troops between Cotagaita Fortress with the Chichas Battalion, in charge of Colonel Medinaceli, while Valdés was sent to Chuquisaca with the Union Infantry Battalion and Loyalist militias, and Olañeta himself marched toward Vitichi, with 60,000 pieces of gold from the coin house in Potosi. But for the Spanish military personnel in Upper Peru, it was too little too late, as since 1821 all-out guerrilla warfare had raged in this part of the continent. However, in Cochabamba the 1st Battalion of the Infantry Regiment, Ferdinand VII, led by Colonel José Martínez, rebelled and sided with the independence movement, only to be followed later by the 2nd Battalion, Ferdinand VII's Infantry Regiment in Vallegrande, resulting in the forced resignation of Brigadier Francisco Aguilera on February 12. Royalist Colonel José Manuel Mercado occupied Santa Cruz de la Sierra on February 14, as Chauyanth stayed in the hands of Lieutenant Colonel Pedro Araya, with the cavalry squadrons Santa Victoria and Dragones Americanos, and in Chuquisaca the cavalry squadron Dragones de la Frontera under Colonel Francisco López claimed victory for the independence forces on February 22. At this point, the majority of royalist troops of Upper Peru refused to continue fighting against the powerful army of Sucre and switched allegiances. Colonel Medina Chelier with 300 soldiers also revolted against Olanyatta, and on April 2 of 1825 they faced each other in the Battle of Tumasla, which ended with the death of Olanyatta. A few days later, on April 7, General José María Valdez surrendered in Checalt to General Urdaneta, putting an end to the war in Upper Peru and signaling victory to the local independence movement, which had been active since 1811. Role in the foundation of Bolivia. After the Constituent Assembly in Chuquisaca was reconvened by Marshal Sucre on July 8 of 1825, and then later concluded, it was determined the complete independence of Upper Peru under the Republican form. Finally, the Assembly President José Mariano Serrano, together with a commission, wrote down the Independence Act of the Upper Peruvian Departments, which carries the date of August 6, 1825, in honor of the Battle of Junín won by Bolívar. Independence was declared by 7 representatives from Charcas, 14 from Potosi, 12 from La Paz, 13 from Cochabamba and 2 from Santa Cruz. The Act of Independence, wrote by the President of the Congress, Serrano, states in its expositive part, "The world knows that the land of Upper Peru has been, in the American continent, the altar where the free people shed the first blood, and the land where the last of the tyrants' tombs finally lays. Today, the Upper Peruvian Departments protest in the face of the whole earth its irrevocable resolution to be governed by themselves." Through a decree it was determined that the new state in Upper Peru would carry the name of República Bolívar, in honor of the liberator, who was designated as Father of the Republic and Supreme Chief of State. Bolívar thanked them for these honors, but declined the presidency of the Republic, a duty he gave instead to the victor of Ayacucho, Grand Marshal Sucre, who would later be sworn in the same day as the first president of Bolivia. After some time, the subject of the name of the young nation arose again, and a Potosian deputy named Manuel Martin Cruz offered solution, suggesting that in the same manner which from Romulus comes Rome, from Bolívar ought to come the new nation of Bolivia. If from Romulus, Rome, from Bolívar, it is Bolivia. By the time Bolívar got the news of the decision, he felt flattered by the young nation, but until then he hadn't accepted willingly Upper Peru because he was worried about its future. Due to Bolivia's location in the center of South America, this, according to Bolívar, would create a nation that would face many future wars, which curiously did happen. Bolívar wished that Bolivia would become part of another nation, preferably Peru or Argentina, but what deeply convinced him otherwise was the attitude of the people. On August 18, upon his arrival to La Paz, there was a manifestation of popular rejoicing. The same scene repeated when the liberator arrived to Aurora, then to Potosi and finally to Chuquisaca. Such a fervent demonstration by the people touched Bolívar, who called the new nation his pride-elect daughter, and was called by the peoples of the new republic their favorite son. After the foundation of Bolivia, he became also the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Bolivia, which he created the following day on the basis of the guerrilla forces and active patriot armies stationed at the time of the declaration. He gave the young republic its first constitution in 1826. Battle of Tarqui. In the Battle of Tarqui, fought on February 27, 1829, heavily outnumbered 2-1, Sucre defeated a Peruvian invasion force led by 3rd President and General of Peru José de la Mar, whose intentions had been to annex Guayaquil and the rest of Ecuador to Peru. Post-independence, when a strong movement arose against Bolívar, his followers, and the Bolivian constitution in 1828, Sucre resigned. Assassination. Sucre was killed on June 4, 1830. General Juan José Flores wanted to separate the southern departments, called the District of Ecuador, for the Gran Colombia so as to form an independent country and become its first president. General Flores foresaw that if Antonio José de Sucre arrived in Quito from Bogotá, he could thwart his plans. Since Sucre was very popular due to his reputation as hero and leader in the battles of Pichincha, Tarqui and Ayacucho, General Juan José Flores put himself in contact with the anti-Bolívar and anti-Sucre leader Brigadier General and the commanding general of Cauca, José María Obando, who was not present at Sucre's death but who delegated this criminal act to the Venezuelan Colonel Apollino Murillo. Commander Juan Gregorio Sarria, José Arazo, and his 3 peons were accomplices. The plan was to ambush José Antonio de Sucre on the morning of June 4, 1830, in the cold and bleak forested district of Berucos, along a narrow path that was perennially covered with fog. The 5 assassins were hiding behind trees along the part of the trail known as La Jacoba, waiting for Sucre's party, which would be passing the area single file. Sucre's retinue comprised 7 persons, 2 muleteers with the baggage, 2 sergeants, one being the marshal's orderly, a representative to the Congress from Cuenca, and his servant, and finally Sucre himself. When Sucre approached La Jacoba, he was struck by 3 bullets, 2 inflicting superficial wounds to his head and 1 piercing his heart. He fell from his mule, which had been shot in the neck, and died almost instantly. His body remained there for 24 hours, as his companions, fearful of a similar fate, had fled in panic. Later, Juan Gregorio Sarria and Colonel Apollino Murillo confessed that it was Obando who had convinced them to assassinate Sucre. Commander Juan Gregorio Sarria also confessed that Obando had paid him to kill Sucre. Since there were anti-Bolívar politicians and officers in Bogotá that wanted to see both Bolívar and Sucre eliminated, the ringleader of the anti-Bolívar faction in Bogotá was Santander, who was Obando's friend and who had failed in his attempt to assassinate Bolívar. The 3 peons who were part of the Sucre assassination party were poisoned by Apollino Murillo to prevent them from testifying about Sucre's murder. In the end, Colonel Apollino Murillo was convicted and shot in the main square of Bogotá for the murder of Sucre on November 30, 1842, and José Arazo died in prison that same year. José María Obando should have met the same fate but was granted immunity due to the fact that he was too powerful in the Cauca department. Francisco de Paula Santander, although indirectly involved with Sucre's death, was directly involved with Bolívar's attempted assassination and was exiled. Burial and aftermath. The following day, Sucre's orderly, a sergeant named Lorenzo Caicedo, with some help from others, buried the body and marked the makeshift grave with a cross formed of branches. When the widow received news of the assassination, she promptly brought Sucre's remains from Berucos to Quito, where they were interred in secret in the oratory of the Chapel of Eldin on one of her haciendas. Subsequently, she had the remains transferred, also in secret, to the Carmen Bajo convent in Quito, where they were placed face facing the main altar of the church. 70 years later, in April 1900, Sucre's remains were discovered and, their authenticity scrupulously verified, transferred to the Quito Cathedral on June 4, 1900, in a sumptuous parade led by the executive and his ministers, the high dignitaries of the church, and a diplomatic corps. At the time, the government ordered the building of a crypt, but it was not inaugurated until 32 years later, on August 4, 1932. This mausoleum consisted of a 9-ton monolith of granite from the quarries of the Pichincha volcano. Its cover, on which a cross is carved in high relief, was so heavy that 30 persons were required to move it into place. According to the December 19, 1830 Gaceta de Colombia issue No. 495, the power-hungry, ambitious General Obando paid an assassin to kill Sucre by falsely informing the assassin that Sucre was a traitor and had to be stopped because Sucre's intentions were to go to Quito and separate the Department of Cauca and the 3 southern departments of Colombia and unite them with Peru. In reality, Sucre, a protégé of Bolívar, was going to Quito to stop the separation of the District of Ecuador from the Gran Colombia and to retire as soon as possible in Quito to live a quiet life with his wife. Some have argued that Sucre was ordered assassinated by General Obando so as to leave no clear successor to Bolívar in the Gran Colombia. Before his death, Bolívar believed Sucre to be the only man who could have reunited the Gran Colombia. However, Bolívar's generals and the majority of the politicians running the separate departments of the Gran Colombia had other selfish and ambitious plans. Sucre represented, according to historian Tomás Polanco Alcantara, the indispensable complement to Simón Bolívar. Upon hearing the news of Sucre's death, Bolívar said, "Se ha derramado Dios excelso la sangre del inocente Abel." Bolívar later wrote, "Sucre is buried in the Cathedral of Quito, Ecuador. As he had said, I want my bones to be forever in Quito, where his wife, Mariana de Carcelén y Laria, Marquise of Solanda, was from." Legacy. Some of his descendants in Venezuela, Ecuador, and the United States have followed in his military and political footsteps.